Racist Karen tells Snoop Dogg, "Go back to Africa." His response leaves everyone speechless. The Ohio sun painted long shadows across the supermarket parking lot on what seemed to be just another ordinary afternoon. The store buzzed with its usual activity, the gentle hum of refrigerators, the squeaking of shopping cart wheels, and the mundane symphony of everyday life. However, this particular day would prove to be anything but ordinary. Among the shoppers navigating the aisles was a man whose presence, though deliberately understated, carried an undeniable gravitas. Snoop Dogg, the renowned artist and entrepreneur, had chosen to visit the store incognito, wearing simple jeans and a plain jacket. His purpose extended beyond mere grocery shopping. He had recently become the owner of this establishment, a fact known to very few. His intention was to observe firsthand how customers were treated, to understand the day-to-day operations from ground level before implementing any changes. The fluorescent lights cast their steady glow over the produce section, where fresh fruits and vegetables created a colorful tableau. The air carried the crisp scent of apples and the earthy aroma of fresh vegetables. Snoop moved quietly through the aisles, his experienced eye taking in every detail of his new investment, while maintaining his anonymous presence. In the same aisle, adjusting her designer glasses while selecting apples, stood an elderly woman who embodied what many would recognize as a Karen, blonde, wearing an expression of perpetual disapproval and carrying herself with an air of unearned superiority. Her carefully maintained appearance and expensive attire suggested someone accustomed to commanding attention and respect, regardless of whether it was deserved. The atmosphere in the store remained peaceful, with customers going about their shopping, the soft beeping of barcode scanners in the background, and the occasional announcement over the PA system. Yet beneath this tranquil surface, tensions were brewing that would soon break through the careful veneer of everyday civility. The elderly woman's demeanor shifted noticeably as she became aware of Snoop's presence in her vicinity. Her body language transformed, reflecting deeply ingrained prejudices that she seemed to wear as comfortably as her designer clothes. She clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles whitening against the leather handle, and her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Snoop, well versed in recognizing such behavior but choosing to rise above it, continued his shopping with dignity. He moved with deliberate care, maintaining his composure while selecting produce. His years of experience in the public eye had taught him to navigate such situations with grace, though each encounter still carried its own weight of disappointment and sadness. The woman's discomfort seemed to grow with each passing moment, her prejudices building like a pressure cooker about to release its steam. Her eyes darted between Snoop and other shoppers, as if seeking validation for her unwarranted anxiety. The simple act of sharing a shopping aisle had become, in her mind, an affront to her perceived status and privilege. The store's gentle ambience continued unchanged, the soft music playing overhead, the distant conversations of other shoppers, the routine beeping of checkout scanners. Yet within this ordinary setting, an extraordinary moment was about to unfold. The produce section, with its vibrant displays of nature's bounty, was about to become the stage for a confrontation that would reveal the persistent undercurrent of racism that still flowed beneath the surface of everyday American life. As Snoop reached for some vegetables, purposefully avoiding any movement that might be misconstrued as threatening, the elderly woman's prejudices finally boiled over. The mundane act of grocery shopping was about to transform into something far more significant, a moment that would challenge not just individual prejudices, but the very fabric of community relations in this small Ohio town. The fluorescent lights continued their steady illumination, unaware that they were about to witness a scene that would leave an indelible mark on everyone present. The simple, everyday setting of a supermarket produce section was about to become the backdrop for a powerful demonstration of how dignity and wisdom could stand firm in the face of ignorance and prejudice. The tension that had been building in the produce section finally erupted with the force of a thunderclap. The elderly woman's voice, sharp and filled with unmasked prejudice, cut through the ambient noise of the supermarket. "Go back to Africa." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke, spreading their poison throughout the store's atmosphere. The impact was immediate and profound. The usual sounds of shopping, the squeaking of cartwheels, the rustle of produce bags, the quiet conversations, all ceased as if someone had pressed a universal pause button. Other customers froze in place, their expressions a mix of shock, embarrassment, and discomfort. Even the consistent hum of the refrigeration units seemed to dim in response to the hateful outburst. Snoop Dogg, still holding his shopping basket, felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. It wasn't the first time he had faced such blatant racism, but each instance carried its own unique sting. His initial reaction was one of profound sadness, not just for himself, but for the state of society that still harbored such deep-seated prejudices. The elderly woman, emboldened by her own outburst, stood with her chin raised defiantly, her designer glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. Her posture suggested someone who felt entitled to express such views without consequence, someone who had perhaps done so many times before without challenge. In that crucial moment, Snoop made a conscious decision. Rather than responding with anger or walking away, he chose to transform this ugly moment into an opportunity for growth and understanding. With remarkable composure, he turned to face the woman directly and asked with genuine curiosity in his voice, "Do you have any idea what you just said?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Other shoppers held their breath, watching the scene unfold. Some had pulled out their phones, sensing that this moment deserved documentation, while others simply stood transfixed by the unfolding drama. The woman's response came quickly, her voice sharp with defensive anger. "I said what I thought. This is my country and people like you don't belong here." Her words carried the weight of generations of unexamined privilege and prejudice, each syllable revealing more about her own fears and limitations than about the man she sought to diminish. It was then that Snoop chose to share his family's story. Setting his shopping basket carefully aside, he began to speak, his voice calm but carrying the power of truth. He told of his bisabuelo born in Mississippi, facing the harsh realities of an oppressive system. He spoke of his grandfather, who fought in World War II only to return to a country that still treated him as a second-class citizen. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the store began to shift. The initial tension gave way to something else, a shared experience of witnessing transformation in action. Other customers listened intently, many nodding in understanding or wiping away tears. The woman's previously rigid posture began to show signs of uncertainty, her confident facade cracking under the weight of Snoop's dignified response. His words painted a picture of resilience and determination, of a family that had contributed to the building of America, despite facing constant obstacles and discrimination. He spoke of the blood, sweat, and tears that his ancestors had invested in this country, making it as much their home as anyone else's. The elderly woman's expression began to change. The arrogance that had fueled her initial outburst started to waver in the face of such eloquent truth. Her hands, still clutching her shopping cart, had lost their aggressive grip, and her shoulders had begun to slouch slightly, the weight of her own words perhaps finally reaching her conscience. The supermarket's regular sounds gradually began to return. A distant beep of a scanner, the soft whir of the automatic doors, but the atmosphere remained charged with the power of this moment. Snoop's response had transformed what could have been an ugly confrontation into a powerful lesson about dignity, resistance, and the importance of standing up to ignorance with wisdom rather than anger. Ignorance doesn't get better in silence. Snoop's words resonated through the supermarket aisles, carrying a weight that seemed to touch every person present. The produce section had transformed from a simple shopping area into an impromptu amphitheater of social change, where every witness became part of a larger narrative about confronting prejudice with dignity. As Snoop continued sharing his family's story, the crowd of onlookers grew. Some customers who had been rushing through their shopping now stood still, grocery lists forgotten in their hands. Others who had been heading toward the checkout lines turned back, drawn by the powerful atmosphere of the moment. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a stark clarity on the scene, as if nature itself wanted every detail of this encounter to be visible. Snoop's voice remained steady as he spoke about his family's journey through American history, Each word was carefully chosen, not to shame or attack, but to educate and illuminate. He talked about the perseverance that allowed his ancestors to overcome oppression, about their unwavering belief in the promise of equality and justice that America represented, despite the contradictions they faced daily. The elderly woman's transformation was becoming visible to all observers. Her previously rigid posture began to soften, the arrogance in her expression giving way to something more complex, a mixture of discomfort, shame, and perhaps the first stirrings of understanding. Her designer glasses, which she had wielded like a shield of superiority, now seemed to weigh heavily on her face. Around them, the supermarket continued its regular operations, but with a subdued quality that acknowledged the significance of what was unfolding. The beeping of checkout scanners seemed more distant, the usual announcements over the PA system more muted. Even the steady hum of the refrigeration units appeared to have lowered its tone in deference to the moment. Some customers had begun to nod in agreement with Snoop's words, while others wiped away tears they couldn't quite explain. A few were discreetly recording the interaction on their phones, sensing that this was a moment that deserved to be preserved and shared. The power of witnessing someone transform hatred into a teaching moment had created an almost electric atmosphere in the store. As Snoop spoke about the importance of standing up against ignorance and prejudice, his words carried extra weight because of his calm, measured delivery. He wasn't just talking about resistance, he was demonstrating it in real time, showing how to confront bigotry without descending into hostility. His presence commanded respect, not through intimidation, but through the quiet strength of his conviction. The other shoppers' reactions told their own story. Some exchanged knowing glances, perhaps recognizing similar experiences from their own lives. Others looked down at their feet, confronting uncomfortable truths about times they might have remained silent in the face of prejudice. The collective conscience of the community seemed to be awakening in that fluorescent-lit space. What had started as a hostile confrontation was evolving into something more profound, a moment of community reflection and potential growth. The elderly woman's initial attack had backfired, not by meeting an equal force of anger, but by encountering a response so measured and dignified that it stripped away the power of her hatred. The produce section, with its colorful displays of fruits and vegetables, had become a stage for one of humanity's oldest and most important dramas, the confrontation between ignorance and wisdom, between hatred and understanding. The simple act of grocery shopping had transformed into a powerful lesson about dignity, resilience, and the possibility of change. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere in the store continued to evolve. The initial shock of the confrontation had given way to something more contemplative. Snoop's words about his family's struggles and triumphs had created a bridge of understanding that seemed to span not just the physical space between him and the elderly woman, but the deeper divides that separated members of the community. The elderly woman's transformation continued to unfold before the gathered crowd. Her face, which had earlier been contorted with prejudice and superiority, now showed signs of internal struggle. The designer glasses that had earlier seemed like a symbol of her perceived status now appeared to weigh heavily on her face, as if the lens through which she viewed the world was becoming uncomfortable to bear. The silence that followed Snoop's words was different from the shocked quiet that had followed her initial outburst. This was a contemplative silence, filled with the sound of minds opening and perspectives shifting. The woman's hands, which had gripped her shopping cart with such righteous anger, now trembled slightly as she processed the impact of her actions and the power of Snoop's response. Unable to maintain her previous stance of defiant superiority, the woman's shoulders began to slump. The carefully maintained facade of entitlement was crumbling in the face of such dignity and wisdom. Her eyes, which had earlier flashed with contempt, now darted around the store, perhaps seeing for the first time the diverse faces of her community members who had witnessed her moment of naked prejudice. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was palpable in the air around her. The arrogance that had fueled her racist outburst seemed to be draining away, leaving behind something raw and uncertain. She struggled to form words, opening and closing her mouth several times without speaking, the weight of her earlier proclamations hanging heavily in the air between them. Other customers watched this metamorphosis with a mixture of fascination and hope. The produce section had become more than just a setting for confrontation. It was now a space of potential redemption. The fluorescent lights continued their steady illumination, bearing witness to this moment of human growth and change. Some of the observers nodded in understanding, recognizing perhaps their own moments of revelation and growth. Others stood in respectful silence, acknowledging the difficulty and importance of confronting one's own prejudices. The atmosphere in the store had shifted from tension to something approaching reverence for the transformation taking place before them. The woman's designer purse, which she had clutched so tightly earlier, as if protecting it from imagined threat, now hung loosely at her side. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to have lost some of its rigidity, as if her internal shifting had manifested in her physical appearance. The carefully constructed image of superiority was dissolving in the face of authentic human connection. Snoop maintained his dignified presence, neither pressing his advantage nor retreating from the moment. His calm demeanor provided a safe space for the woman's transformation, demonstrating that real change comes not from humiliation, but from understanding. The steady hum of the refrigeration units provided a gentle backdrop to this moment of profound human development. The woman's transformation reached a crucial point as she finally found her voice again. But this time, her words came from a different place, not from prejudice and fear, but from the beginning of understanding. Her voice, which had earlier rang out with such harsh clarity, now trembled with the effort of confronting her own biases. The other shoppers remained still, creating a respectful space for this moment of change. The produce section, with its vibrant displays of fruits and vegetables, served as a reminder of the diversity and beauty that exists in nature, a fitting backdrop for a lesson in human dignity and growth. As the woman struggled to process her emotions, the atmosphere in the store remained charged with potential. The simple act of grocery shopping had become a catalyst for personal transformation, demonstrating how everyday moments can become opportunities for profound change when met with wisdom and dignity. In the aftermath of her confrontation with her own prejudices, the elderly woman seemed to age years in moments. Her designer outfit, which had served as armor for her sense of superiority, now appeared to hang heavily on her frame. With trembling hands, she began to gather her forgotten shopping items, her movements carrying the weight of profound realization. She began, her voice barely above a whisper. I never thought about it that way. The words came out haltingly, each syllable carrying the effort of someone trying to cross a vast divide of understanding. The previously sharp edges of her voice had softened, transformed by the power of Snoop's dignified response to her hatred. The supermarket's usual ambient sounds had begun to return. The gentle beeping of scanners, the rustle of shopping bags, the distant conversations of other customers. Yet there remained a charged quality to the atmosphere, as if the air itself had been transformed by what had transpired. The fluorescent lights continued their steady illumination of this scene of human transformation. Snoop observed the woman's struggle with compassion, recognizing the difficult journey from prejudice to understanding. His role in this moment wasn't just as the target of her initial hatred, but as a catalyst for change. The produce section, with its vibrant displays of life and growth, seemed an oddly appropriate setting for this moment of human development. It was then that Snoop made a decision. The time had come to reveal another truth, one that would add yet another layer of meaning to what had already transpired. With the same calm dignity that had characterized his response to her prejudice, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the same measured tone that had helped transform her anger into understanding, "I think there's something else you should know." He extended the card toward her, watching as her eyes widened in recognition of the corporate logo and his name beneath it. The realization spread through the gathered crowd like a wave. Whispers began to circulate as people processed the fact that the man they had just witnessed handling such a charged confrontation with such grace was not just a random shopper, but the new owner of their local supermarket. The woman's hands trembled as she accepted the card, her designer glasses sliding slightly down her nose as she read its contents. The revelation seemed to complete her transformation. the final piece of understanding falling into place. Her face, which had already shown the signs of her internal struggle, now registered a new level of comprehension. Around them, the other shoppers who had witnessed the entire scene began to respond to this new information. Some nodded in appreciation of the deeper meaning this added to the encounter. Others smiled, recognizing how this revelation transformed a moment of community, tension into something approaching destiny. But Snoop wasn't finished. With the same calm authority that had characterized his entire response to the confrontation, he began to share his vision for the supermarket. He spoke of his plans to make it a true community space, one where every person, regardless of their background, would feel welcome and valued. The elderly woman listened to these plans with newly opened ears, her earlier prejudices continuing to crumble in the face of this additional context. The designer purse she had clutched so defensively earlier now hung forgotten at her side, its significance as a status symbol diminished by the weight of the moment. As Snoop concluded his impromptu announcement, the atmosphere in the store had transformed completely from the tension of the earlier confrontation. The produce section, which had witnessed the ugly face of prejudice, now bore witness to the possibility of change and growth. The refrigeration units hummed their steady accompaniment to this moment of community transformation. The elderly woman, who had entered the store carrying the weight of her prejudices, now stood straighter, not with the artificial rigidity of superiority, but with the genuine strength of someone beginning to see the world through new eyes. Her designer glasses, which had earlier seemed like a shield, now appeared to help her see more clearly the truth about her community and herself. As the gathered crowd began to disperse, returning to their shopping with minds and hearts full of what they had witnessed, the impact of the day's events continued to resonate through the aisles of the supermarket. What had begun as a confrontation had transformed into a moment of community growth, a demonstration of how wisdom and dignity could triumph over prejudice and fear. The fluorescent lights continued their steady illumination, but they now seemed to shine on a slightly different store, one that had witnessed a small but significant step toward a more understanding and inclusive community. In this ordinary supermarket, on what had started as an ordinary day, an extraordinary transformation had taken place, one that would continue to ripple through the community long after the automatic doors had closed on this remarkable afternoon.